name's Dick Fleming, and during the Vietnam War I was a member of Recon Battalion and a scout with Force Recon, and I tell my stories in a book that I wrote called Chasing Charlie, about my experience in Vietnam. I also have a website called ForceRecon.com that has additional links to other resources in the Recon community, and some photographs that I took of my time in country and that other people have sent me over the years. So you might be interested in checking that out. I've sequenced my videos in a playlist from the time I first got into Vietnam till my flights out. And now I'm going to add a few more videos about what happened to me after I got back into the States. And this is also my comments on war in general. And before I begin, I'd like to, make a few statements about my time in with both these units. Both Force Recon and Recon Battalion were elite units within the Marine Corps. And I am proud, very proud to have served in that, both of those organizations. They were the essence of professionalism, in my opinion. That's not to say that they didn't have their problems, and it's not to say that, there were things done to me that I resented at the time. But it was the Marine Corps. You went into if you went into the Marine Corps, you can't expect to be mollycoddled because it just wasn't going to happen. You had to accept the fact that you were in a highly disciplined organization, and that if things were done unjustly, you're probably given slack on the other end. So I talk about my experiences with the officers, for example. And in general, all of my officers and all of my superiors were excellent. Yeah, there were a couple bad apples, not bad apples exactly, but officers that I had problems with. And that could be associated, that could happen in any organization. I'm sure that the officers themselves had problems with their superiors. And of course, it's a Marine Corps tradition to complain, to bitch and complain. I mean, where would the Marine Corps be without everybody bitching and complaining? The enlisted men complained about the officers probably complained about the enlisted men, the captains complained about the lieutenants, and vice versa. I'm sure it went all the way up the chain of command to the very top. And I think that's the case in any organization. So, when people say to me, Dick, you're really bitter about your time in the Marine Corps. No, I'm not bitter about the Marine Corps. I am bitter about the war. I am bitter about the stupidity of the war and the stupidity that sometimes led to needless casualties and needless deaths. Yeah, I am bitter about that. Whether it could be helped or not at the time, I don't know. And more than anything, I'm bitter about what happened to me after I got out of Vietnam. When I left Vietnam, I was really happy and a little surprised and a little shocked that I had made it out of the war and with relatively minor injuries. I had some shrapnel in my leg, that migrated around my body as though it had a life of its own. I ended up with probably a pathological distrust of authority that stayed with me for years and years and years, and probably hasn't left me yet. But at the time, when we got out of the service, when I got out of the service, it was 1969, America was tearing itself apart with the Vietnam War. when I went in 1967, the Barry Sadler's Ballad of the Green Berets was on the hit parade. And when I got out, it was up against the wall, motherfucker. That was the chant that was going around. You know, the anti-war movement was in full swing. Yeah. Well, yeah, and of course we weren't privy to what was going on in the States. You know, we were reading the only rag that we had, the Stars and Stripes, and that was telling everybody how great the war was doing, and we were reading about how everybody was supporting us. So when we got on that plane to be sent back to our homes, and they told us to take off our uniforms and leave our medals behind. You know, that was quite a shock to us, because we were proud. We were proud of what we had done. You know, we thought we did the right thing. We thought we were supporting our country. You know, we all of us, no matter what rank or what we did in Vietnam, I think the vast majority of the Marines felt that they had done a good job for their country, and we were proud of their service. And we all kind of expected that, you know, we'd be welcomed home. But that's not what happened. When I got home, I think the first 6 or 8 months, maybe a year, were kind of a blur to me. I would spend my time in my room reading. I'd take long walks with my dog. I just wanted to be left alone. For whatever happened during that time period to try to heal myself, I needed that tranquility, that peace and quiet. I didn't want to be screwed with anymore. I didn't want to be ordered about. I needed time for my mind to acclimatize itself to civilian life. You know, Chief had hoped that he would have been given a ceremony that would have mitigated the effects of war on him, and integrated him back into society. I didn't have that. They had the VA, but I had no knowledge of how to even approach the VA at the time. They didn't give us any information about it. You know, there was only 2 weeks from the time I went out of the service, out of Vietnam in my jungle utilities till the time I made it back home. You know, there was no real debriefing time, and certainly no one was helping us integrate back into society in any way. I don't know whether the VA had any special programs at the time and I just wasn't aware of them, or whether they didn't have any programs, period. I didn't know. So I tried to keep to myself. I had this thought of going back to school, and in my dream, you know, I'd be walking along past ivy-covered buildings in the fall, and the leaves would be coming down, and I'd be going into the library or reading, going into my room and studying, everything calm. That was my objective. That's what I thought, but I had no knowledge of what I didn't know what I would be studying. I didn't think, well, I'm going to become a chemist, or I'm going to become an engineer, or I'm going to study to eventually become a lawyer. I didn't have that thought out. But I did go take some courses, and you know, didn't really fit in with the other students at all. You know, I was living at home still. It didn't really fit in with the other. Well, I had an apartment later on actually, but I didn't really mesh with the other students. It's not like I lived in a dormitory with everybody else, and I could have, you know, made new friends and you know, be part of the student body. You know, I was basically an outcast. You know, I didn't really know anyone, and I didn't want to know anybody really. I was still in that Vietnam mindset where, you know, you didn't want to make too many friends because they weren't going to be around that long. You know, I still had some of my old friends, but they either were in Vietnam or had just gotten back from Vietnam, and you know, I'd lost touch with most of them. So I was basically on my own. And when I got back, you know, I tried to connect with my old friends from high school. Most of them had been in the service, the Navy or the Army, or but they had managed to, almost all of them had managed to avoid going to Vietnam. Some of them had fairly cushy jobs, and I wondered why I hadn't followed in their example. You know, why did I go into the Marine Corps where I was almost certain to be sent to Vietnam? But I didn't know that's what I wanted at the time. Fool that I was, but that's what I wanted at the time. Wanted to do my part for the war. Wanted to participate in the events. I wanted the excitement. I wanted the chance to prove myself. I wanted to impress the girls when I got home. like a lot of my friends we talked about in Vietnam, you know, and we were all disappointed, I'm afraid, because when we got back, the girls didn't want to have anything to do with Vietnam vets. We were pariahs. I went to a party one time and opened up the door, and there were a smell of marijuana in the room, and these long-haired, hippie-looking guys were there in their army jackets, and they looked at me, and one of them said, "Who let the baby killer in?" Well, who let the baby killer in? I said to him, I said, I never killed any baby. I never killed anybody who wasn't trying to waste me first. And I tried to hold myself in check, because I knew if I had gotten in an altercation at that time, and maybe altercation even now, you know, that I wouldn't just hurt somebody. I might end up killing them. You know, there was that dark demon inside me from the war. And I think he's still inside me. I think he wants to get out. He wants to claw his way out, and I try to keep him in control. But I don't think he's ever really left me. Well, I left that party, and I walked around for a few hours just trying to calm myself down, and you know, I realized what I had said sounded more like, you know, language at a fire base than anything else. But that was the times, you know. The girls didn't want anything to do with the drug crazed killers from Vietnam, and neither did anybody else. If you mentioned, my father told me, you know, hey Dick, you know, maybe it's time you should get a job instead of hanging around the house. Well, he thought it'd be easy, you know, as a veteran for me to get a job. It was just the opposite, you know. They heard the word Vietnam, and that was it. You know, you weren't going to get any job, not even the lowest job. They wouldn't hire you at all. It was only after I stopped saying, you know, I was a Vietnam vet that I was able to get, you know, an entry-level position. You know, well, you know, eventually, as eventually I found a girl that liked me, and we had known each other before I went to Vietnam, and she had written to me and kept writing to me, and boy, she was a wonderful person, and you know, we've struggled, and you know, found ourselves in a small apartment, and you know, I'd worked with a menial jobs, part-time jobs, you know, anything to make a buck, and she worked as well, and you know, we struggled along like two kids, you know, that's all we were. And eventually we had a daughter, a beautiful daughter. I tried to be a good husband and a good father and a good friend to my friends. You know, I tried to put Vietnam behind me, but Vietnam didn't want to be put behind me. I had to live with it every day. I had to live with the pictures that flash in front of my mind periodically, like photographs, like still photographs, and they still do. You know, vivid flashes of photographs of scenes in Vietnam. You know, and I'd go out and be out for a walk or in the woods, you know, and I'd see, walk along the path, and I'd think to myself, hey, this would be, watch out, Dick, this would be a good place to be ambushed. You know, my heart would start to pound, and you know, my trigger finger would start to twitch. You know, crazy. But what could I do? I couldn't control it. I'd hear a helicopter overhead. You know, whop 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 whop. My heart would pound, and still does to some extent. And God forbid, you know, that if somebody hit a firecracker went off, or I heard a gunshot or something like that, or even the dumpster top of the dumpster slammed down, you know, and I'd be almost on the ground. Never quite, but almost. You know. And one day when I was lying in bed with my wife early in the morning, and I looked up, and out of the ceiling I could see this spider coming down right toward my head on a spider web. And big spider, and I pushed my wife out of the bed, and I rolled off the other side, and I go, watch out, he's going to bite you, it's a spider. Pushed her off. Turned on the light. Of course there was no spider. It was all in my imagination. There was no spider there. But that's what I saw. So my wife said, you know, Dick, you better get yourself some help. You know, you need some psychological help. So I went over to the VA, and they set me up with an appointment with a psychologist there at the VA. And she was a nice young lady, and you know, she had a little talk, and then she said to me, tell me the worst thing that happened to you in Vietnam. And I said, I can't tell you the worst thing that happened to me over there. I said, I'll tell you a funny story though. She was okay, and she was writing down. She said, tell me your funny story. And I told her the story about the sergeant who had cut the line over his own head as he was hanging from the helicopter. And she looked at me and she goes, how could you think that's funny? That's not funny. I didn't know. You know, it seemed funny to me at the time. you know. She turned her back on me, and I must have shocked her. Well, a few weeks later, I got a note from the VA that they had awarded me a small amount of money for PTSD, and they encourage me to go into a group counseling session. But I never did because I was afraid that if I dwelled on these things, that they would take me over. You know, my wife said, I said to her, you know, I don't think I have PTSD. I made it through without any real problem. I don't know why they're giving me this. And she goes, yeah. He goes, well, you're certainly better. She goes, the first 6 months, you were still climbing down out of the trees. Well, I guess I was. I remember one time going to her apartment, and instead of staying over at the apartment, I had that internal turmoil in me, and I spent the night sleeping outside in the back of her father's house, you know, where they had like a little woods back there, and I slept out there. I'm surprised he allowed me to even date her after that, you know. But he was a Marine. He had served on the aircraft carrier Bunker Hill during the Second World War. So maybe he knew what I was going through, or at least was putting up with me. So one day I got a package in the mail from the Navy Department. And it was a citation, and of course I hadn't gotten any medals or anything like that. I mean, we got loads of medals, you know. They were all for things like I don't know, Vietnamese cross of gallantry and all, and presidential unit citation stuff, but I never got anything like a specific award. And I opened it up, and it said, you know, citation read, you know, for Lance Corporal Richard Fleming is awarded the Navy Achievement Medal for his participation in Operation such and such, at which, as a grenadier with First Force Recon, Mr. Fleming was responsible for eliminating 34 enemy combatants. Well, I looked at that, you know, and I said, well, what's this grenadier crap, you know? Sounded like something from, you know, Napoleon's army or something like that, a grenadier. You know, yeah, I had carried an M79 grenade launcher, you know. I used to carry around Thumper. Thumper was a cut-down M79, when we had cut off the barrel and the sights and cut off the stock, and the whole thing was nothing more than a giant pistol with a barrel on it like that fired an M79 round. And I used to carry Thumper all the time, even with my M16 on one side, or an M16 or the M60, and then on my other side on a strap I carried Thumper. And he was nice and light. He was only this big, and you could even fire him one hand. And I got to be really good with Thumper. We called him Thumper because when you fired it, it made a thump. And then the round flew out and activated after about 15 feet or so, and then exploded exploded as like a grenade on the other end. You could fire it as a mortar or directly. It was an excellent weapon, and Thumper was my friend. So but I had never. But where did these 34 enemy combatants come from? You know, the only thing I could think about was that time we had led the grunts up to attack that fortification on the hill, and I had fired Thumper a few times in that engagement, a number of times in that engagement, but when the North Vietnamese withdrew, they withdrew with their bodies and casualties, and we found the infantry the grunts found a few bodies, but not 34 of them. Where did that come from? Or was it another engagement? I don't know. In any case, I put it up on my wall. It was the only thing I had. It was some token of appreciation, right? And my friend who was in the Navy, stationed in Newark there, as they came over, and he looked at that and he says, "Oh, I got one of those too." I said, "You did?" I said, "I didn't know you were in Vietnam." He goes, "I wasn't in Vietnam. No, I never left Newark. I was a clerk there in Newark." I said, "Well, how'd you get with this Navy Achievement Award?" He goes, "They gave them out to everybody. We had to work over the weekend one weekend to get a report out on time. We had to collate it and get it all stapled up and mailed out, and there were about 500 copies of it. It was a hell of a job." And they gave the Navy Achievement Medal to everybody in the office. Well, after he left and I heard that, I took my Navy Achievement Award and I threw it in the wastebasket. It was like, to me, it was the same as if you went to a restaurant and you were a waiter at a restaurant and somebody gave you a penny tip. It was more of an insult to me than any commendation. That's, I don't know. Maybe it was just me at the time. But I still don't want the damn thing. If it had reappeared in my files somewhere, but it just didn't cut it. not after everything I was through. But looking around, I used to see these guys with their Vietnam license plates and everything like that. And I don't know how many. I said, whoa, where are you in Vietnam? He says, well, no, I wasn't in Vietnam, but I'm a Vietnam era vet. I was in Vietnam era vet. In fact, no wonder we lost the goddamn war. There was only a handful of us fighting. The rest of it was all support troops, in the rear or off of ships or whatever. Where were the actual men that were fighting the war? I'm sure they're out there. Don't get me wrong, but in all my years, since then, I don't even remember, maybe 4 or 5, that we recognize as another grunt or another infantryman, either from the army or whatever. That's just the way it was, And then I finally got a decent job at a chemical company. And I really worked my way up from the bottom, and that's no lie. In fact, my first job was to analyze or take samples from wastewater in this great big pit, about 12 feet deep. I'd climb down there and I'd take a little vial and I'd take this wastewater sample up to the lab. And one day my wife came down to pick me up, and they go, "He's in the pit." So she peered down and me at the bottom, scooping up this water, and she started crying. Made me feel terrible. A job is a job, but I really started at the bottom in that place. And I worked my way up, though. I worked I started to do more and more in the laboratory of this chemical place, and they were kind of a faltering laboratory. They actually made plastics for golf balls. They would mold these golf balls in these great big presses. And the golf balls had all kinds of problems. Some of them shattered. The paint wouldn't stick onto them. They sold a lot of them to the driving ranges, but You know, a lot of them were very good. They were solid golf balls. They were molded like cookies in these big presses. And one of my jobs eventually was to measure these things and get some statistics on them, their weight and their size and their center of gravity and things like that. And I always had a pretty good feel for numbers, and so I would calculate all of these averages and things like that, and try to determine, why the paint wouldn't stick to them. We were working with the chemists and stuff, and I became part of the laboratory there. And they also did air and water pollution testing, and we used to climb smokestacks, 300 feet up in the air, and take measurements for gas and stuff like that. It interested me, I when you're interested in something, you do well at it. And I was interested in that. I liked all those machines and all that chemical analysis. And I had taken a lot of chemistry and physics when I was in high school, and I kind of overdosed on it when I was in high school, actually. They had a special program at the time for students. They were trying to get them interested in the science curriculum. So I was actually enjoying it. Didn't pay much, but I was enjoying the work. And I thought, well, if I could. It used to take like a week to do the calculations for that air pollution, how many grains of soot were coming out of the smokestacks, these new EPA regulations. And I thought, well, I might be able to put this on a computer. And there was a time-sharing computer company down the road, and I got money to go down there, and I programmed up that first the computer program, the first computer program in New Jersey that was approved by the EPA for that stack analysis. And the nice thing about it was you could make a little change, increase the speed of the motor or the temperature of the gas, and you could do a what if analysis on it. But anyway, I had a knack. I determined that I had a knack for it, and I liked it, and I started taking classes at night on computer programming, and eventually that became my profession. And I worked during the day, and I went to school at night, and my wife stayed with me. Gradually worked my way up in the company, and then I changed companies and went full time into data processing and computer programming, and that became my career eventually. And it was a good career for me because I didn't have to deal with a lot of people. I didn't have to deal with a lot of bullshit, And a computer program, if you got it going, if you got it working, it's going to work or it's not going to work. It's not one or the other. It's not going to. There's no ambiguity in it, and it's a solitary profession. You can sit at your desk and do your job, and and sort of tune out everything, and by concentrating on the program, I pushed all of that Vietnam stuff to the back of my head, where it festered probably, and still festering, because you can't. I don't know how you ever get rid of that. I don't know whether it's better to think about it and try to bring it out into the open like I try to do with Chasing Charlie here, or whether it's better to push it aside and try to forget it. Maybe there is no good answer to that. Maybe you just have to deal with it, have to live with it. Now I believe I served honorably. I don't have any guilt from my time in the service. I believe I served with honor. I, I could talk about this again in war in general as to whether you, I think I will in another video, just the question of morality in war and what's acceptable and what isn't, and the effects of guilt on you. But I can honestly say that I don't have that hanging over my soul, that guilt that I acted dishonorably or I acted in a way other than to save my own life, but that's a question for another video. I think probably my last video of this series. So I worked my way up in my new company, and still, from time to time, I'd hear something almost like an aside, or one time, I lost, thinking about it, I lost 4 or 5 years of my life to Vietnam. So, yes, I was there for 13 months. That was one thing. And then another year of training, and then another probably 2 or 3 years afterward. And I was still, part of the Marine Corps. It's just they never called me back after I had left Pendleton. I was still on the books, but I guess they didn't want a lot of Vietnam vets, walking around the base. And I was never called back. But occasionally, I'd meet up with like a supervisor, some young guy who, when I was slogging through the jungles of Vietnam, he was in graduate school, getting his PhD. When I was, learning how to fire a machine gun, he was applying for his job at as a supervisor in this company. And by the time I got there as a technical specialist, he was already at a department head. And he said to me one time at a party, he goes, Dick, you're a really smart guy. He says, you did really well on that project. Hey, thank you, great, thank you, appreciation. He goes, I looked on your resume. How did someone as smart as you end up in Vietnam? Oh man, just like you take a pin and you put it through a balloon, just destroy me. What am I supposed to say? How about patriotism? How about honor? How about sacrifice? All these things. Well, if I said something like that to him, my career would be shot. And the same thing when I was at the, at the bar there, as bartender in Force Recon, and Uncle came in, Am I gonna lose my cushy job because of him? No, I'm not going to. I had learned enough. I had gotten enough common sense to avoid that. But that happened. I applied for another position there one time, and the guy looks at it and he says, "Well, I got your resume here, but there's this blank of 3 years. Where were you then?" And he made a joke. He said, "Were you in jail?" I said, "No, almost. I was in the Marine Corps." But there was that gap there, and you never make that up. You never make it up without some sort of affirmative action. Okay, now. We have affirmative action in other areas, for race, color, creed, or whatever, but we need one for the vets, to make their transition easier. Because none of the vets that are coming out of Afghanistan or Iraq wars or whatever, they're going to be traumatized the same as me. Matter of fact, one of our neighbors one time came over to me and he goes, Dick, can you help me? I said, sure, what's going on? He goes, my son, who's in college, his second year of college, he wants to join the Marine Corps. This is right after 9/11. He said, will you talk him out of it? You were in the Marines. Can't you talk him out of it? We're really afraid. I said, he's not going to listen to me. He goes, well, give it a try. See what you can do. So he comes over, and nice kid, really nice kid. And I asked him, why he wanted to join the Marine Corps, and he gave me the same answers that I would have given my father if my father had asked me. I want to protect America. I want to prove myself. I don't know what I'm doing in school. I don't want to, I don't have any objective. Maybe that'll give me an objective. He was all excited about joining the Marine Corps. And of course, I tried to change his mind. I tried to say, well, if you're going to go in the Marine Corps, go in as an officer, for God's sakes. Don't go in the way I did as an enlisted man. Go in as an officer. And no, he didn't listen to me. And I said, well, finally I gave up, and I said, well, you do what you want. I said, but when you get out, don't expect anybody to thank you, because they didn't thank me.